AI. You hear about it everywhere these days, right? It seems like you can't escape it.
True that. And honestly, it's not just hype either. AI is really changing things up.
Big time. But like with anything powerful, there's that flip side, you know? The whole ethics question.
Yeah, definitely a lot of concerns about where this is all headed.
That's what we're going to get into today. Really try and unpack some of this. We've got some good sources to help us out, starting with this report.
The one from the Council of Europe.
That's it. Common ethical challenges in AI. They did a deep dive on this.
It's a dense one, but chock full of insights.
We also found this article in the Harvard Gazette Ethical Concerns Mount as AI takes bigger decision-making role, which is pretty striking. Gets into some real-world stuff.
And Chapter 4, Challenges in Ethics in AI.
Right. From this, well, we'll leave the book title a secret for now. It adds another layer to this whole conversation, though.
Definitely helps round things out. I'm seeing some interesting connections between all three, even though they come at it from different angles.
That's what makes it so fascinating to me. Like, it's not just one group saying, hey, be careful. It's coming from all sides.
And what I think is important, too, is these aren't just theoretical problems. They matter to everyone, even if they don't realize it yet.
So true. Okay, let's get specific then. The Council of Europe, they point to this thing called inconclusive evidence.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Can you break that down for us a little?
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
You've got, say, an AI that's deciding who gets approved for a loan. Right?
Oh, okay, yeah. Makes sense.
Inconclusive evidence means the AI might approve someone, but not because it truly understands if that person can repay.
Oh, so it's like making a judgment call, but without all the facts?
More like it's basing its decision on patterns it sees in the data, even if those don't tell the whole story.
Like if a bunch of people from a certain zip code default on loans, the AI might just deny anyone from that area.
Exactly. Even if that particular person has great credit, it's acting on correlation, not actual causation.
Wow. So it's not like the AI is being deliberately unfair. It just doesn't think the way we do.
Right. And that can be a real problem as AI gets involved in more and more decision-making, especially important ones.
And then there's the whole idea of transformative effects, right? Like,
Yeah.
even small decisions can have big ripple effects when AI is involved.
Huge ripple effects. And that's where it gets kind of scary. Because if it keeps making those little logical leaps, it can really shift things on a societal level.
It's almost like it's playing a game with different rules than ours, and we're just starting to realize it.
Exactly. We're still figuring out the rule book.
That Harvard Gazette article, it has some pretty jarring examples of this playing out in the real world already. Like, I was reading about how some loan AIs are replicating redlining practices.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's showing us we might be accidentally teaching AI to be biased based on how things were done in the past.
Which is a terrifying thought, that our past mistakes could get coded into these systems.
It is. And then you layer on the problem of traceability. It's often hard to figure out why an AI made a certain decision. Like, even the people who built it might not know.
So if something goes wrong, who's accountable?
Exactly. That's the question. It gets really murky, especially with these super complicated systems. And this lack of accountability, that's what makes some of the scenarios in that book chapter so unsettling. Like they talk about autonomous weapons, AI making life or death decisions on the battlefield.
Yeah, like who's responsible if something goes wrong there? The programmer, the general. Heavy stuff.
Definitely gets you thinking. And those aren't hypothetical situations either. This stuff is being developed right now.
Okay, so let's recap here. We've got AI that might be making biased decisions based on incomplete info. Then, it's super hard to untangle why it made those choices. And on top of that, no one's really sure who's to blame if things go sideways.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's the ethical minefield we're walking through.
Where do we even begin to address all of this?
Well, one thing to think about is the impact AI is having on our autonomy. You know, our ability to make our own choices freely.
Okay.
It's not just about AI making choices for us. It's about how it's shaping the very choices we have available. Think about algorithms, right? Like the ones that decide what you see online.
The ones that recommend products and news articles. Yeah, I'm constantly seeing that stuff.
They're creating what's called a choice architecture. Basically, they're nudging you towards certain options, even if you don't realize it.
So even if it feels convenient, it could be limiting what we're exposed to, right?
Big time.
Yeah.
And that has ethical implications too. If we're only getting fed information that reinforces our existing beliefs, that's not good for anyone.
It's like I already feel like I'm in an echo chamber on social media sometimes. Never thought of that as an ethical problem before, but makes sense.
It definitely is. We were promised this internet that would connect us to all this diverse information, but it's kind of doing the opposite for a lot of people.
It's almost as AI could be dividing us further without us even realizing it.
That's the risk.
So what can we even do about all of this? Are we just along for the ride?
Not at all. Just being aware of these issues like you are now, that's huge. The future of AI is being shaped right now, and we all have a say. In our next segment, we're going to dig into some specific challenges, like bias, and talk about what's being done to try and fix them.
Can't wait to hear more about that. I'm already feeling a little less helpless.
Good, that's what we're going for. This is a conversation everyone needs to be part of.
Okay, so choice architecture. I'm still wrapping my head around that.
It's a mind bender for sure. But it kind of leads us right into another big ethical dilemma with AI.
Which is bias.
Right, yeah. We were just talking about those examples from the Harvard Gazette article.
Like the lone AIs that were basically replicating redlining practices.
Crazy, right? It's like we're not even intentionally coding bias into these things, but
they're picking it up from the data we feed them. Like it's learning from our past mistakes.
and repeating them on a massive scale. Exactly. And the particular example, that's what's called representational bias. The AI is learning from data that's already skewed, in that case, by decades of discriminatory lending policies.
So the AI is inheriting our societal biases, but without any of the, I don't know, the nuance that a human would have.
It's like a digital family heirloom, but no one wants to claim it.
Oh, that's good. And it seems like this kind of bias can pop up in just about any application, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like the article also mentioned those job screening algorithms, the ones that analyze people's voices and facial expressions during interviews.
Yeah, I've heard about those. Kind of creepy.
Well, the problem is if those algorithms are mostly trained on data from one type of person, let's say men in a certain age range, then they might unfairly judge anyone who doesn't fit that mold.
So someone who's nervous or speaks with an accent or just has different mannerisms, they might be automatically penalized.
It's a real possibility. And it's really hard to detect that kind of bias because it's often buried deep within the code.
Okay, so that's representational bias. What other kinds are there?
Well, there's also measurement bias, which has more to do with how the data itself is collected. Let's say you're using AI to predict crime rates in different neighborhoods. Sounds useful, right?
Sure.
But what if the data the AI is learning from is already flawed? What if certain neighborhoods are over-policed, so there are more arrests, which then feeds into the data and creates this?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. The AI ends up amplifying existing inequalities instead of helping us address them.
Man, this stuff is insidious. Like you think you're using AI to be objective, but
But you're actually baking in all these hidden biases. And then there's algorithmic bias, which is a little more technical. This is where the algorithm itself introduces bias, even if the data is perfectly fine.
wait, so even if we meticulously clean up our data, there's still a chance the algorithm could mess things up.
It's possible. Think of it like a recipe. You can have the freshest ingredients, but if the instructions are wrong, the cake's still going to be a disaster.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Algorithms are designed to find patterns. But sometimes those patterns reflect underlying biases that the algorithm just isn't equipped to handle.
It's like playing whack-a-mole with bias. You fix one kind and another one pops up. So what are we doing to combat this?
Well, a lot of smart people are working on it on different fronts. One strategy is to diversify the teams who are building and deploying these systems, getting people with different backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives involved.
More brains on the problem.
Exactly. It's like you need different detectives, each with their own special skills, to crack a case.
2 heads are better than 1, or however many heads you can get.
Right. And then there's transparency. We need to be able to understand how these AI systems are making decisions. It can't all be a black box.
It's like a nutritional label for your food. You want to know what you're putting in your body.
Right. We need that same kind of transparency with AI so we can identify and fix those hidden biases.
And I know the pasted text source talked about the need for more open source AI projects where anyone can look at the code and improve it. Seems kind of radical, but...
It's a good idea. The more eyes on the problem, the better.
So this all ties into that idea of responsible AI, right? It's not just about making AI that's technically impressive. It's about making sure it's aligned with our values.
You got it. It's about making sure AI is used to benefit society, not harm it.
Sounds like a tall order, especially when the tech is moving so fast.
It's a huge challenge, no doubt. And it's not something that tech companies can solve on their own either. The Council of Europe report, they really emphasized the need for collaboration. between policymakers, researchers, ethicists.
And the public, we all have a stake in this.
Absolutely. This isn't just a tech issue, it's a human issue.
Okay, so we've talked about bias, but what other ethical dilemmas are we facing with AI? I mean, there's got to be more, right?
Oh, yeah, tons. Like discrimination is a big one, which can happen even without explicit bias in the AI.
Discrimination. Yeah, it's hard to talk about bias without that coming up. I mean, it feels like discrimination often stems from those power imbalances, right?
Exactly. And AI is a new kind of power, so it's no surprise that it's raising these same concerns. It's like any tool. It can be used for good or for bad. The Council of Europe report, they called out unjustified actions by AI systems as a major ethical red flag.
Unjustified actions. Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Imagine an algorithm that denies someone a job or a loan or even parole based on factors that are basically discriminatory, even if those factors aren't explicitly programmed into the code.
So it's like the AI is finding loopholes to discriminate, even if the programmers didn't intend for it to happen.
It's possible, yeah. And that's why we need to be so careful about how we design and deploy these systems. We can't just trust that the algorithm is going to be fair and neutral. We need ways to test them, to audit them for discriminatory outcomes.
Sounds like transparency and ethical auditing are even more important than we thought.
Totally. And it's not just about preventing harm, it's about making sure that AI is actually used to promote fairness and justice.
Right, like instead of perpetuating the problems, it could actually help us solve them.
Exactly. Imagine an AI that helps identify and correct for bias in human decision-making, or an algorithm that helps create opportunities for people who have been historically disadvantaged. That's the kind of potential we need to be focusing on.
Okay, so AI as a force for good. I like that. But it's clear we're still figuring all of this out, right? It's like we're building the plane as we're flying it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's why these conversations about ethics are so important. We need to be having them now, before these technologies get so entrenched that we can't change course.
Well, speaking of course correcting, I know that book chapter brought up something called distributed responsibility.
Yes, that's a tough one.
It's like when AI systems make mistakes, it's often really hard to pin down who's responsible. Is it the programmers, the companies using the AI, even the users themselves?
It's a tangled web for sure. And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to holding AI accountable. Because the more complex these systems get, the harder it is to trace the decision-making process back to any one person or group.
So what do we do about that? I mean, that sounds like a legal and ethical nightmare waiting to happen.
It's definitely uncharted territory. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Legal experts are already working on how to adapt existing laws to this new AI landscape. And ethicists are coming up with guidelines for responsible development.
So there's hope.
Definitely. But it's also up to all of us as citizens to demand accountability from those who are building and using AI. We need to keep asking those tough questions, push for transparency, and make sure that people are held responsible when things go wrong.
Right, like we can't just sit back and passively accept whatever the tech industry throws at us. We have a voice in this.
We absolutely do. And that reminds me of something we touched on earlier, autonomy. Our ability to make our own choices. AI can actually both enhance and erode our autonomy, depending on how it's used. The Harvard Gazette article, they quoted a philosopher, Michael Sandel. He asked this really thought-provoking question. He said, if some elements of human judgment are indispensable, how do we ensure they remain part of the AI equation, even as the tech gets more sophisticated?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's like we can't just hand over all decision-making power to machines, even if they seem really smart or efficient. There are certain human qualities, empathy, moral reasoning that we can't afford to lose.
I agree. And that actually brings us to another ethical challenge that's tightly connected to AI. Surveillance.
Oh boy, yeah, that's a big one. It feels like we're constantly being watched these days by cameras, by our phones, by those algorithms tracking our every move online.
And it's a valid concern, especially as AI-powered surveillance systems get even more sophisticated. Facial recognition being used to track people's movements or algorithms that try to predict criminal behavior based on your social media posts. It can get pretty Orwellian pretty quickly.
Like that saying, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. We need to be really careful about where we draw the line with AI surveillance.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between security and freedom and making sure that we don't sacrifice our privacy and civil liberties in the name of progress.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. Bias, discrimination, autonomy, surveillance. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, to be honest, but in a good way.
Me too.
Here.
I've only scratched the surface, but hopefully this conversation has given you a better grasp of what's at stake. And more importantly, how you can be a part of shaping the future of AI.
Because it is being shaped right now. The choices we make today, the conversations we have, they all matter.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to everyone listening, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious. The future of AI is in our hands. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time.